Take the last half of a potato tucked in my coat.
A bitter taste in every breath. Sarah and Tom, young and worn beyond their years, sat hunched by a dying fire, their shadows dancing with the last embers. Their stomachs ached, a hollow echo of the land's emptiness. This was it, their final meal. A single shriveled potato, baked hard as a rock. Sarah tore it in half, her fingers trembling. "Eat, Tom," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle like the corn husks in the field. Tom shook his head, pushing his half back to her. "No, you, Sarah. You're smaller." A silly argument, really, over a bite that wouldn't even fill a bird, but it felt monumental, a last stand against the overwhelming tide of nothingness. The wind howled, a mournful song that seemed to carry all the sadness of the world on its back. They split it finally, each bite a silent promise, a desperate clinging to a shared moment in a world that was tearing everything apart. They didn't know then, sitting there in the dust-choked twilight, that this meager meal would be the anchor to a love story stretched across a continent. They just knew the hunger, the fear, and the quiet comfort of each other's presence. That night, sleep was a thin veil, easily torn by the wind's lament and the gnawing ache in their bellies. The next morning, the sun was a pale, watery eye in the dusty sky. Their landlord, a man with eyes as hard as flint and a heart just as cold, stood over them. "Time to go," he barked, his voice devoid of mercy. "No crops, no rent. You heard the news." They had heard. Everyone had. The dust bowl was swallowing farms whole, spitting out families like husks. Sarah clutched a small, worn wooden bird, a gift from her mama. Tom held a tattered map, an impossible dream of California. "We'll find work," Tom said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hopeful. The landlord just snorted, a plume of dust rising from his nostrils. "Work's a ghost these days, boy. Good luck chasing phantoms." He kicked at the dying fire, sending sparks into the wind. Sarah looked at Tom, her heart a knot of fear and resolve. "We'll make it, Tom. We always do." But the unspoken question hung heavy in the air. How? They had nothing but the clothes on their backs and the dust clinging to their skin. The road ahead stretched long and uncertain, a ribbon of sorrow weaving through a land parched and broken. They walked away from the only home they'd ever known, the wind at their backs, pushing them further into the great unknown. The first days on the road were a blur of aching feet and gnawing hunger. The dust was a constant companion, clinging to their hair, their clothes, their very souls. They hitchhiked when they could, riding in the back of creaking trucks filled with other desperate souls, all chasing the same elusive dream of a better life. Mostly they walked, mile after mile, their hope thinning like the horizon in the heat haze. One evening, camped by a dry creek bed, a stranger approached their small fire. He was a wiry man, with eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 roads and the weariness of 1,000 more. "Headin' west?" he rasped, his voice rough like sandpaper. Tom nodded, wary. The man squatted, uninvited. "Heard tell of work in Arizona. Cotton fields. Hard work. But it's something to—" Sarah's heart gave a little flutter. Arizona. A new name, a new possibility. The man pulled out a harmonica, its mournful tune echoing the desolate landscape. He played a sad, sweet melody, and for a little while, the dust and the hunger seemed to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of shared humanity. He shared his meager stew, a kindness that felt like a miracle. But as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone by morning, leaving only the memory of his song and the whisper of hope for Arizona. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into a relentless march across the sun-baked land. They picked up odd jobs here and there, washing dishes, mending fences, anything to earn a few pennies for food. The small coins felt heavy in their pockets, precious beyond measure. One sweltering afternoon, they found themselves in a small town, a collection of ramshackle buildings clinging to the edge of a railroad track. A flyer, tacked to a weathered post, caught Sarah's eye. "Farm hands needed, California." Her breath caught in her throat. California. the promised land. But beneath the bold lettering, a smaller, more ominous warning was scrawled, families separated. A cold dread settled in her stomach. They had heard the whispers. Sarah found herself on a packed train, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and unfulfilled dreams. Women and children, their faces etched with the same fear and uncertainty, filled every seat, every inch of floor space. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks was a constant reminder of the growing distance between her and Tom. She clutched the wooden bird in her hand, its smooth, worn surface a small comfort. It was all she had left of her old life, a tangible link to a past that felt impossibly far away. A woman beside her, her face kind but weary, offered a small piece of dried apple. "You look like you could use this, dear," she said, her voice soft. Sarah managed a weak smile, grateful for the unexpected kindness. They shared stories, tales of lost homes and shattered dreams, finding a strange camaraderie in their shared misfortune. The woman, Martha, had lost her husband to the dust pneumonia, leaving her with 3 small children to feed. Their shared grief created a fragile bond, a small island of connection in the vast ocean of their despair. Martha spoke of California, of the promise of work, but also of the harsh realities, the low wages, the crowded camps. "It ain't no paradise, child," she warned, "but it's better than starvin'." Sarah listened, her mind racing. She had to find Tom. She had to. The train rumbled on, carrying her deeper into the unknown, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She would survive, she would work, and she would search for him until her last breath. Tom, meanwhile, was on a different train, a freight car crammed with men, their faces grim and determined. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat and tobacco, and a quiet desperation hung over them all. He sat by a small, grimy window, watching the endless landscape blur by. Each mile felt like a stab to his heart, pulling him further from Sarah. He stared at the tattered map in his hands, California marked with a hopeful X. It felt like a cruel joke now, a mocking reminder of their shattered dreams. A man across from him, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, spoke. "Lost something?" Tom looked up, startled. "My girl," he mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. The man nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. "Happens a lot out here. Folks get separated. Hard to find em again in all this mess." His words were like a cold slap, but Tom refused to believe it. "I'll find her," he vowed, his voice gaining strength. "I have to." The man just grunted, then pulled out a... Sarah found work in a sprawling peach orchard in California, her hands raw and aching from the relentless picking. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth and the workers alike. The camp was a collection of flimsy tents and makeshift shacks, teeming with families, all strangers thrown together by the harsh winds of circumstance. Each evening, after a grueling day in the fields, Sarah would sit by a flickering lantern, carefully writing letters to every post office she could think of, hoping against hope that one would reach Tom. She described herself, her wooden bird, and their last meal, a desperate attempt to jog a memory, to make herself known amidst the multitude of lost souls. Martha, her kind-faced companion from the train, worked alongside her, her children playing in the dirt nearby. "Any word, dear?" Martha would ask, her voice always gentle. Sarah would shake her head, a familiar ache settling in her chest. The postmaster, a kindly old man with spectacles perched on his nose, knew her by name now. "No luck today, Sarah," he'd say, his voice full of sympathy. Each no was a heavy stone added to the burden in her heart, but she refused to give up. Hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed, but Sarah nurtured it fiercely, like a precious, dying ember. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that somewhere, out there, Tom was searching for her too. Tom, meanwhile, toiled in the sprawling cotton fields of Arizona, his body aching from sunup to sundown. The sharp bowls pricked his fingers, leaving tiny drops of blood on the white cotton. The air was hot and still, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the weary sighs of the pickers. He slept in a bunkhouse, crammed with other men, their dreams as dusty and threadbare as their clothes. Every night, by the dim light of a single bulb, he would meticulously draw Sarah's face on scraps of paper, trying to capture the exact curve of her smile, the light in her eyes. He'd ask every newcomer, every traveler passing through, if they'd seen a girl with a wooden bird, a girl with eyes like the summer sky. Most shook their heads, their faces mirroring his own weary despair. Lots of folks got lost. They'd say, their voices flat, best to forget. But Tom couldn't forget. He wouldn't. He carried a small, smooth stone in his pocket, a stone he and Sarah had found together by the creek near their old farm. It was his touch. One sweltering afternoon, a truck driver with a kind smile offered Sarah a ride to the next town. "Heard they're hiring at the cannery there," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "Good money for a strong back." Sarah hesitated. Another move, another chance. Maybe in a new town, a new post office, her letters would find their mark. She thanked Martha, promising to write, and climbed into the truck, leaving the peach orchard behind. The cannery was a noisy, bustling place, the air thick with the smell of tomatoes and sugar. The work was relentless, standing for hours, her hands moving mechanically, sealing jars, labeling cans. The pay was better, though, enough to send a few more letters, enough to buy a small meal that wasn't just watery stew. One evening, after her shift, Sarah sat on the porch of her boarding house, the sounds of distant music drifting on the breeze. A young man, barely older than herself, sat nearby, strumming a guitar. His music was mournful, a bluesy tune that spoke of hard times and broken hearts. "That's a sad song," Sarah said softly, almost to herself. The young man looked up, his eyes kind. "Ain't much else to sing about these days, ma'am." He picked another tune, a more upbeat melody, but even its cheerfulness had a weary edge. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining Tom's smile, his laughter. She still missed him so fiercely, a constant ache beneath her ribs. The cannery was just another stop on her endless journey, a stepping stone on the path to finding him again. Back in Arizona, Tom had heard whispers of work gangs heading north, towards the vast agricultural fields of California. The thought sent a jolt of energy through his weary body. California. Sarah was there, he just knew it. He packed his meager belongings, the tattered map now a sacred relic, and joined a group of men bound for the promised land. The journey was grueling, riding in overcrowded boxcars, sharing meager rations, the dust still their constant companion. Along the way, he heard stories, fragments of lives, whispers of other lost souls. He spoke of Sarah, of her wooden bird, of their last meal, his voice unwavering, his hope a flickering flame in the darkness. Many just shook their heads, their eyes holding a weary pity. "Best to let her go, son," an old man advised, his voice raspy from years of dust. "This life ain't for holding on to things." But Tom couldn't let go. Sarah was not a thing. She was his heart, his home, his everything. He held onto the smooth stone in his pocket, its coolness a reminder of her touch. He pictured her face, her gentle smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. He would find her. He had to. The train rumbled on, carrying him closer to California, closer to the possibility of a reunion that felt both impossibly distant and tantalizingly near. Sarah, still working at the cannery, felt a growing restlessness. The repetitive work, the constant noise, the endless stream of jars and cans, it all felt like a cage. Her letters, still sent with unwavering hope, continued to come back unanswered. One evening, a group of workers were gathered around a radio, listening to the news. The announcer's voice, crackling through the static, spoke of new migrant camps being established further north, closer to the big cities, offering more consistent work. "Better conditions, they say," someone murmured. Sarah's ears perked up. A new camp, a new opportunity. Maybe Tom would be there. Maybe her letters, sent to a new post office, would finally find him. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. She approached the cannery foreman, a gruff but fair man, and gave her notice. He understood, of course. Everyone was always chasing the next rumor, the next possibility. With a small pouch of wages and her wooden bird clutched tight, Sarah set off again, her heart a mixture of trepidation and fierce determination. The road stretched out before her, a familiar ribbon of dust, but this time it felt like a road leading directly to Tom. She kept her eyes on the horizon, searching for a sign, a glimmer of hope, anything to suggest that her endless journey was nearing its end. Tom finally arrived in California, the Golden State, but it was far from the paradise he had imagined. The camps were overcrowded, the work scarce, and the competition fierce. He found himself picking oranges in vast groves. The sweet sent a stark contrast to the bitterness in his soul. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth and the workers alike. He continued his relentless search, asking everyone he met if they'd seen a girl with a wooden bird, a girl named Sarah. Most shook their heads, their faces weary. "Lots of Sarahs out here, son," they'd say. "Lots of lost souls." But Tom refused to be discouraged. He posted notices in every general store, every post office he passed, simple messages describing Sarah, their last meal, a desperate plea for information. He worked hard, saving every penny, determined to have enough to travel, to search every corner of this vast state until he found her. One evening, sitting by a flickering campfire, a young woman approached him. Her face was smudged with dirt, her clothes worn, but her eyes held a spark of resilience. "You lookin' for someone?" she asked, her voice soft. Tom nodded, his heart leaping with a sudden, wild hope. "My Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She listened patiently as he described her, the wooden bird, the memory of their last meal. She shook her head slowly. "Can't say I've seen her, but I'll keep an eye out. Everyone's lookin' for someone out here." Her words, though not what he wanted to hear, were a comfort. He wasn't alone in his search. Sarah arrived at a bustling new camp, a temporary city of tents and shacks that sprang up around the edges of vast vegetable fields. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music, but also the undertone of struggle and desperation. She quickly found work picking tomatoes, her hands stained red from the ripe fruit. The work was backbreaking, but the community here felt different, a little warmer, a little more hopeful. She continued her nightly ritual of writing letters, sending them to every new post office she encountered, hoping to cast a wider net, to finally snag a response. One afternoon, while taking a break in the shade of a dusty truck, she overheard a conversation. "Heard about a fella," one picker said, "travelin' through lookin' for his girl. Says she carries a wooden bird." Sarah's heart stopped. A wooden bird? Her wooden bird? She scrambled to her feet, her voice catching in her throat. "Where? Where did you hear this?" The picker looked surprised. "Just a rumor, ma'am. He's lookin' for a Sarah. Said something about a last meal, too." Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run through her. It had to be him. It just had to be. A desperate urgency seized her. She had to find him. She had to. The rumor was thin, a mere wisp of smoke, but it was enough to ignite a fire of hope in her weary heart. She started asking questions, relentlessly, her voice hoarse, her eyes scanning every new face. The camp suddenly felt alive with possibility, a giant game of hide and seek, and she was closer than ever to finding her prize. The rumor of a man looking for a Sarah with a wooden bird reached Tom, carried on the dusty winds from camp to camp. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. He knew it. He just knew it. It had to be his Sarah. He immediately left the orange groves, barely bothering to collect his last wages, and hitched a ride with a traveling salesman heading in the direction of the tomato fields. The journey was agonizingly slow, every bump in the road, every delay, a torment. He clutched the smooth stone in his pocket, its coolness a steadying presence against his frantic heartbeat. He envisioned their reunion, the words he would say, the embrace that would mend years of heartache. He imagined her smile, the way her eyes would light up when she saw him. The salesman, a jovial man with a booming laugh, noticed Tom's agitation. "Something important waitin' for you, son?" he asked. Tom nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. "The most important thing," he finally managed to croak. The salesman, sensing the depth of his passenger's urgency, pressed the gas pedal a little harder, pushing his ancient truck to its limits. Tom stared out at the passing landscape, a blur of dusty fields and distant mountains. He was almost there. He was so close. The thought was a powerful elixir, chasing away the weariness, fueling his desperate hope.